Hi, everybody. We're here to continue our work on the pre-Socratics. So today we're going to be looking at Heraclitus and Parmenides. That's a pair you can put in mind, and then the figures who come after Parmenides, and they're known as the Pluralists, and that's going to be Empedocles, Anaxagoras, and Democritus. So we're going to say a bit about them, and again, I mean, this is an ocean of names, so you don't have to worry about every detail here. My goal for us in the course is to get a sense of the sweep, right? How did the ideas of one thinker lead to the ideas of the next thinker in the story we're telling? Now, of course, this week we're building on our previous discussion of the Milesians and Pythagoras. So the Milesians, remember Thales, Anaximander, Anaximenes. These are people looking for the ultimate substance of things. It's air or water, whatever it may be. And Pythagoras, looking for those patterns, looking for those harmonies in the cosmos that make it a cosmos and not just a universe, not just a bunch of stuff. So already we've gone some distance in our story, and today we'll take the next step. So let's get going. All right, so we're calling this the later pre-Socratics, and this kind of concludes this little portion of the course, the first quarter of the course, basically. Next week, we'll look at Socrates. Here is that chart, the chart that I would love you to have in mind. So we've already highlighted here the Milesians and Pythagoras, as I mentioned. And today we're going to be adding in Heraclitus and Parmenides there in the green. And I say again, so repetition is learning, right? These are opposites, Heraclitus and Parmenides. And then we'll be adding in the pluralists. So that's Empedocles, Anaxagoras, and Democritus. This other fellow, Leucippus, you see he's mentioned by Guthrie, our author, as a kind of colleague of Democritus, predecessor. It's a little unclear kind of what he's all about. We don't have a lot of sources about him, but people do refer to him. Next time, we'll be moving toward our discussion of the sophists. And our connection there, as you'll see, so just to anticipate, is Democritus. The last of those pluralist thinkers is going to be the teacher of, you see on the list there, Protagoras, the first and most important of the sophists. So let's dive in and look at Heraclitus and Parmenides. Of course, Heraclitus there on the left, Parmenides, well, you would, I mean, there's no reason for you to know that, right? Heraclitus on the left, Parmenides on the right. Starting with Heraclitus. Heraclitus is a cult figure. He's like the bad boy of ancient philosophy, and I recommend him to you. I mean, we have his work mostly in fragments, but here's the essence of it. Change. Change is the essence. Everything is constantly in a process of becoming and change, such that you can't even really pin down, right? What is something? Absolutely, what is it? Well, I don't know. It was something else a minute ago. It will be something yet again in another minute's time. He criticized in Pythagoras this aim to search for facts. Now, that's a quote from Guthrie. What does Guthrie mean by facts? Well, Pythagoras, remember, was looking for these harmonies, the frequencies of sound. We talked about music last time. The cosmos had to be mapped out, and so we had to actually have knowledge of it. A squared plus B squared equals C squared. The Pythagorean theorem. We learn it in high school, right? That's a fact, man. That's a real thing, right? That's not just an idea or an interpretation. But Heraclitus thought we needed to go deeper than this accumulation of knowledge, of factual knowledge. He wanted to look beyond the senses and even beyond the ideas of Pythagoras and look for this thing he called the logos. Now, the logos is a very important concept, and it's going to come up many places in our course. It's most known, and may be known to many of you in the course, as a term used in Christianity many years later, centuries later, for Jesus Christ. So the prologue to John's Gospel, that's the fourth of the four Gospels in the New Testament, begins, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." Opening line of John's prologue. The word there, is logos. Right? So the Greek word logos refers, to a word, like all the words you see on the screen, in that sense, but it also refers to the principle, the rationale, the deep logic of something, right? So when you study biology, for example, that is the logos, logi, of bios, life. So you don't want to just get a bunch of facts about life, right? You want to understand the movement, the interrelationship of those facts. This is logos. Sociology, right? You're looking at society, the logos of society. Again, you don't want just a bunch of facts. You want to know how they fit together and how they move and develop together. This is what Heraclitus was looking for. Everything he saw as in a constant state of tension and war, he called it. That's his image. We'll see at the bottom here, the last point. He sees fire. If anything is the principle, water and air and Thales and Anaximenes, fire is what Heraclitus would look to. He's not being quite so flat-footed about it and saying it actually is fire, but that's the image that he uses, the poetic image. Think of a bow, right? And Guthrie points this out, like a bow in tension. It's ready to go. It's always ready to go, and then it springs, right? And a new tension forms, change, becoming, right? This is strife, flux, everything constantly moving, interacting with each other. This is Heraclitus. I have a couple of lines from him from our primary source reading. He writes, although the logos is common, most people live as if they had their own private understanding. But, he continues, one ought not to act and speak like people asleep. This is an interesting notion. And this carries through in philosophy, right? Most of us, most of the time, making our car payments, paying our mortgage, going to work, raising our kids. This is everyday life stuff, right? We go through life. Sometimes it feels like people asleep, right? Heraclitus is criticizing this in a way that would become common for philosophers in later years, right? He's saying, wake up, right? Look for that deeper principle. Don't just get a bunch of facts and put it together and go to bed, right? Understand it, behold it, appreciate the change. Second quote, eyes and ears are bad witnesses to people if they have barbarian souls. So again, here we have kind of a criticism of facts, eyes and ears. Well, you see it, you hear it, do you understand it, right? Your understanding of it is going to depend upon whether you have that insight into logos, into the principle, the deeper relationship. Last one. Upon those who step into the same rivers, different and again different waters flow. This is the famous phrase from Heraclitus. If there's one sentence that's like the Heraclitus sentence, it is, you can never step into the same river twice. Right? Why? It's a very good material image for what he's saying. Step into that river. 10 minutes later, step in, different water. Right? The water is always changing, always flowing, just like reality for Heraclitus. You can never pin it down. Parmenides. Totally different thinker. Think polar opposite, right? For Heraclitus, everything constantly in change in a state of becoming. Flux, 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 right? Parmenides, not. He thinks the exact reverse of Heraclitus, the second point here, starting with that. For Heraclitus, Guthrie writes, movement and change were the only realities. For Parmenides, movement was impossible. The whole of reality consisted of a single, motionless, unchanging substance. Change is an illusion, in fact, right? We think that the river is moving, but let's bring out that focus, right? Let's look at not just the river and the countryside or the continent. Let's look at the earth. Let's look at the universe, right? Sure, stuff is moving, but is it really changing? Is it really changing? Is it really in a process of becoming? For Parmenides, no. When you get that kind of God's eye view, when you look at things in the biggest perspective, it's all the same, right? He wants to look at this deeper reality, and that's our first point here, to burst the straitjacket of material substance. All of these debates he thought about earth and water and fire and air, which is it? He says this is too narrow, right? You can't just identify any one substance. In this way, he's a little like Anaximander, right, with that apeiron, the limitless. But he goes further even than Anaximander, because in Anaximander, remember, the apeiron, the limitless, it changes, it becomes the different elements. For Parmenides, it does not. Right? Some more on him. He plays on the verb to be, right? So if something is, Parmenides says, then it is. And if something is not, right, then it is not. It doesn't change from one thing into another thing. It is what it is, right? And all things are what they are, period, right? All change and movement, he thinks, are ultimately unreal. Becoming is unreal. One thing doesn't change into another. First, you have one thing that is, and then another thing that is. But again, in that big perspective, it's just like moving around the deck chairs, right? You're not actually changing anything. This carries another thing, another corollary, that nothing, ... is not. There is no such thing as nothing, right? You can't talk about a void or a vacuum because it just is not, right? And it either is or is not. If it's not, then it's not, right? Big picture for Parmenides, all of reality is one thing, and there's this kind of unreal appearance of change. But we need to go with our minds deeper, right? And see that it's actually all the same. We do this not with our senses, but with our intellect. So for him, reality is intelligible, right? You use your intelligence. The word intelligence comes from interlegere in Latin, right? Legere means to read, inter means between. It's a beautiful little aside for us for a moment. To be intelligent literally means to read between the lines, right? You're not just reading the facts, you're interpreting the facts. And he really set the Greeks on a path of what Guthrie calls abstract thought. So we're no longer just looking for facts, but we're looking at that deeper principle. And if there's anything that Heraclitus and Parmenides can be said to have in common, it's that. They're looking for that deeper principle, except for Heraclitus, that is change, and for Parmenides, it is not change. It is everything being always the same. So in this way, Parmenides kind of does away with this whole project of these Milesians looking for this substance, as we mentioned before. The problem is people don't like this, right? Because they're like, Parmenides, you got all these theories, they're all abstract, and I don't know, they look pretty true, but, basically, dude, right? Look at common sense experience of reality. It doesn't look like what you're saying, right? We have to save the appearances. How can we explain what we actually see, not just as a bunch of fictions, but as reality, right? And it's that impulse that leads to the pluralists. First, we have a quick line here from Parmenides himself. Okay, this is from our primary source reading from him. He writes, just one story of a route is still left. So think about the thinker is traveling kind of on a road. Right? That one story of a route is still left, that it is. That's the end of the story. That's the one route available to us, right? On this route, there are signs, very many, that what is ungenerated, doesn't come from anywhere. It's imperishable, it never ceases. A whole of a single kind, unshaken, complete. Nor was it, this what is, single substance, nor was it ever, nor will it be, since it is now altogether one, holding together. Right? It's no past or future for this substance. It just is. For what birth will you seek out for it? How and from what did it grow? From what is not, I will allow you neither to say nor to think. By contrast, he could add, right? For it is not to be said or thought that it is not. Whoa, college philosophy class. All right, what do we got here? You got what is, and you've got what is not, right? As we've been saying, what is eternal, unchanging, just what it is, always. What is not, baby, it's not. Like, there's nothing you can say about it. I will allow you neither to say nor to think, right? Parmenides, one substance, all reality, known with the mind. Pluralists. These people don't like Parmenides. They feel kind of bound to Parmenides because, like, his arguments were regarded as very strong and hard to argue against, but they want to find a different path. Empedocles takes a first stab. What's he saying? Holds that all four elements, earth, water, fire, air, are real and ultimate. So he's a little like Parmenides in the sense he's looking for a real and ultimate, but he says, okay, not one thing, at least four, right? The four elements. In all things, Empedocles holds, these things exist, these four, in different proportions, but in themselves, they're eternal and unchanging. So he's got some change, right? He's got the four elements combining with each other, but he also continues this belief that each one is unchanging in itself. How do they interrelate? How do you get more earth, less fire, more water, and so forth? Love and strife. Those are the answers given by Empedocles, right? And here we get almost like a moral dimension inserted. And that's kind of a new thing if you think about everybody we've talked about, right? Love and strife are beginning to relate to actual human relations, right? So this is another part of his reaction toward Parmenides. I mean, Parmenides, there's no human life there. There's no human relationships. In Empedocles, there's the beginning of that. This leads, as Guthrie points out, an interesting passage, an almost Darwinian theory of natural selection, right? Because he's allowing for change. He's allowing for the interaction of, as Darwin would say later, species, of the four different elements. Have a look at that passage, and maybe we can talk about it in the forum. A couple more figures here. Anaxagoras is our second one. Anaxagoras, think of him as a kind of forerunner, person who came before, of the modern natural sciences, right? So he sees philosophy as a scientific activity, and he's one of the first to posit. To posit means to put forward, to state, right? To assert a clear distinction between matter, mind. Right? Parmenides kind of set the stage. He made everything about mind, right? I know everything through my intelligence, through my intellect. Anaxagoras says, all right, I like what you say about mind, right? But we need more than mind. We need to recognize that matter is like a thing, right? It exists. It's not just in the mind. Using our mind, so we're using the mind as a kind of tool, right? We impose order, cosmos, on, that should say, chaotic matter. This is a much more, we would say, almost modern view, right? And that's characteristic of these pluralists. They're much more modern thinkers. That means they're more similar to how we think about things today. For Pythagoras, remember, we find the cosmos. We look at the universe and we're like, oh, wow, it's balanced and harmonious. It's a cosmos, right? For Anaxagoras, he thinks matter is itself chaotic, right? But we impose order on it. This gets picked up later on. Well, it's reflective of earlier Greek ideas about the creation of the universe by a figure known as the demiurge, demiurgos, who imposes order on chaos. In the same way, within the Jewish and Christian traditions, this gets picked up as well. But Anaxagoras, for all of his confidence in the ability of the mind to impose this order, he tries to explain things in terms of material causes. And this is something also that puts him in the same line with modern natural science. He brings in mind only if there's no other explanation, right? His impulse is to explain things we would say today in natural terms, right? In terms that are explicable in relation to matter. Here's our last guy. A couple slides on him. Democritus. Of all the thinkers we have looked at, right? Thales, Anaximander, Anaximenes, Pythagoras, Heraclitus, Parmenides, and Pedicles, Anaxagoras. Democritus is the most modern. He is the thinker with whom we today probably have the most in common, whatever our beliefs. He's known as the laughing philosopher. And in a certain way, this is an echo of Heraclitus. Remember, he was a bit judging people who live as if they're asleep, who don't know the logos. Well, Democritus was aware of that unawareness on the part of most people, but he was willing to laugh at it. He regarded it as folly, right? Not something to be judgmental about, but something to kind of, well, laugh at. He was admired by Aristotle. Socrates and Plato don't say much about him. And he accepts that there could be no coming into being or destruction of anything real. Where do we locate that? Parmenides, right? There could be no coming into being or destruction. Okay, so he's on board with Parmenides there. He says, okay, you're right. No coming into being or destruction. He's not Heraclitus. He's Parmenides. But that what is, right? Remember from the quote, that what is not just a single thing. It is an almost infinite body or assembly of tiny little things, and he calls them, Democritus, atoms. Atoms. So we think of the world today in our modern physics in terms of atomic structures, right? Subatomic structures. We get the word atoms from Democritus. Atoms for Democritus are unsplittable, right? So it's the smallest unit. They differ in their size and shape. We could say today they differ in their properties, just as we hold about atomic structures. And their differences in size and shape determine how they will combine and how we will experience them. So we have sweet things, smooth atoms, bitter things, pointy atoms, right? The very finest, the most rarefied kind of ultimate atoms compose the soul. So even the soul is made of atoms. Atoms are material. Democritus, therefore, is a materialist, right? Yeah, Parmenides, you're right. All of reality is one thing, no change, etc., ultimately speaking, from the big perspective. But it's not known intelligibly, it's not known with the mind, Parmenides. Democritus says it's known with the senses because it's material, right? So modern materialism is not simply Democritus, but it's heavily indebted to this broad worldview of Democritus. Also, in contrast to Parmenides, Democritus holds the atoms, those atoms, right? They got to move around. So, against Parmenides, there is a void. There's got to be some space because these atoms have to interact with each other and join with each other, right? So you're left with basically empty space is real. It's different from matter, but you're left with what we sometimes say. You've heard this phrase, atoms and the void, right? That's Democritus. That's also Karl Marx. It's a lot of modern materialist thought. And notably, Karl Marx, the originator of form of communism that became very influential in our history, of course, wrote his doctoral dissertation on Democritus, right? Democritus, as we mentioned at the top, is the teacher of Protagoras, about whom we will have more to say in the coming weeks. The first of the sophists, first in the sense of the most prominent. Okay, that is what I have for us. So we have talked about, who have we talked about? Heraclitus and Parmenides, right? Heraclitus all about change, Parmenides all about one thing, no change, but you know it with the mind. Right? And then we have three descents from Parmenides. You get Empedocles, he introduces that moral dimension, kind of love and strife, right? The four elements. You get Anaxagoras, he's kind of a proto-natural scientist, right? He's distinguishing between mind and matter for the first time. And you get Democritus, atoms in the void, and he's laughing. All right, good to see you all. See you in the forums.